Everyone, welcome to this recorded version of training. Why recorded? Because my mother always said I had a great face for radio. So hey, who's going to argue with mom? So today's topic is farm and ranch. Lots of farm and ranch opportunities here in Texas. And the good news is that it's not too dissimilar from selling what you're probably used to selling in traditional residential real estate. The other piece of good news is that TREC has done a great job at creating contracts for this segment of business. And so we're going to review a couple of those shortly. But if you have ever considered going into this niche market, I would. It's not that difficult. And like any niche market, there's fewer competition because not a lot of people just kind of jump into this segment of business. And so it is not too terribly difficult to go acquire education in farm and ranch as well. I'm going to hit upon this shortly, but it is a very viable source of business, and a lot of these properties go for $500,000 and higher just because there's so much land associated with it. And so obviously the payoff on this could be very lucrative. So without further ado, what is farm and ranch? Is it a vacant lot? Is it, what is it? Well, it's basically land over 1 acre with some kind of improvement on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a structure, but it has a purpose. It's not just vacant land. It may have animals or crops. A lot of what you see here in Texas are equestrian centers, or there are in fact animals on there, be it for cattle or goats, or again various crops. So it could range in 1 acre, from 1 acre pieces of property to 1,001 acres. So it does kind of run the gamut. So let's talk about the farm and ranch contracts versus the 1 to 4. So there are actual contracts for farm and ranch. So I'm going to put these up on the screen, but we're going to review these contracts in more detail after this. I actually have slides with screenshots of the contracts on them. So the most important thing to do, and if you want to do yourself a favor right now and just pause this and go to Zip Forms or wherever you get your contracts and print out a copy of the TREC Farm and Ranch contract and just follow along. But we're going to look at the improvements section in particular, improvements and accessories, and that would be 2B and 2C1. Price range based on acreage, that's section 3D. Exception documents, section 6E. Surface leases, section 6F. And then lastly, farm and ranch allows for greater detail on all considerations of this kind of property, so meaning the contract itself. So here is the first section that I want to take a look at. So under improvements and accessories, section 2B and 2C1. So here's 2B1. So basically what this says, and then we'll just read it out: farm and ranch improvements. The following permanently installed and built-in items, if any. And so what I like about this is that it actually spells out nearly everything that could possibly be on a farm and ranch piece of land. So windmills, tanks, barns, pens, fences, gates, sheds, outbuildings, and corrals. So improvements is implied to be what is included in this sale. So if you remember the 1 to 4 contracts, it is just speaking about residential only. Now that's covered down here, but it does add possible improvements that are to not leave the property. They are to convey with the property once the home is sold. Okay. 2C1. So accessories. Farm and ranch accessories. The following described related accessories check the boxes of conveyed accessories. Portable buildings, hunting blinds, game feeders, livestock feeders and troughs, irrigation equipment, fuel tanks, submersible pumps, pressure tanks, corrals, gates, chutes. So all of what we've just described so far really speaks to a farm and ranch that has animals on them, right? So it does allow for you to check the box of other, and I would put down there anything else that is an accessory. So what's an accessory? Something that might that a seller might take with them, or want to take with them when the land and the home conveys. So think about a residential sale. What would that be? That might be a custom chandelier that the homeowner has grown fond of. It might be a semi-built-in bookshelf that the seller says, no way, I'm taking this with me. And so in the 1 to 4, there are specific things that you can write in there that says, hey, I, the seller, am excluding this accessory from the home. It cannot be, it's not nailed down, it does not convey with the property. Well, the same goes for farm and ranch. So I would make good use of the other checkbox and be very, very meticulous with your buyer with regards to getting out there, making an itemized list of exactly what conveys and what does not, and what you want included, and make sure it's crystal clear is included in this contract. And so if this is your first transaction with farm and ranch, it's going to take you going out there with the buyer to make sure that you itemize these details. Okay, so the next thing to review on this page is, and I won't go back to the prior slide, but it is section 3D. Okay, and this is, let's see if I can do some highlighter here. Yep, sales price will be adjusted based on the survey. So why would that happen? So the sales price, when you look in the MLS, you will see a price per square foot that is going to include all this acreage, right? And then you can't complete a listing without filling in how many acres it has and how many square feet the home has if this piece of land has a home. And so typically with a residential contract in a subdivision, they're going to have a survey. And so you're going to know exactly what the boundaries are. Well, with a farm and ranch contract, that is not necessarily always clear. Now, you're lucky if you have a survey, and I say that because a lot of these parcels of land have been in families for generations, and you may or may not have a survey. The survey that exists might be inaccurate. Why would that be? Well, because the town may have come in and created easements while that property was in the possession of the current seller. They may have done things that impact the boundaries. They may have built additional stalls for horses, things of that nature. And so what if there is no survey and a survey has to be created? Well, the taxing authority bases its property taxes off of a certain amount of acreage that is presumed to exist in a parcel. And so what if that's not accurate? So what if the surveyor goes out and in the MLS, the property is listed at 125 acres and the surveyor goes out and it's actually 110 acres? Well, that's going to be a pretty big difference with regards to the price that should be paid for this parcel of land. Okay, now if it's plus or minus a couple of acres, it might not be that material, but that survey is going to reveal exactly how many acres is out there, what the boundaries are, and so forth. And so you have the option to check under 3D that the sales price will or will not be amended or adjusted, to use this language exactly, based on the survey. And you can also then go on to say if the sales price is adjusted, the sales price will be calculated on the basis of whatever dollar amount you deem appropriate per acre. Okay, so what I recommend is if you can, as the agent, do some reasonable comps, and let's say that you deem that the price per acre is in the ballpark, it's not too high, not too low, then you might want to put in this section based on the current price per acre. Okay. Then it says if the sales price is adjusted by more than 10%, either party may terminate this contract by providing written notice to the other party within X days. So this is a big paragraph. Okay, if you check will not be adjusted, obviously there is no further out for your buyer. If you do, and I mean, if the parcel of land is greater than 10 acres, I would probably want to check will be adjusted, because any swing in either direction is going to mean a material difference in price. And if it's 10%, well, then either party can cancel the contract and reevaluate. So why would that benefit a buyer? Well, obviously they are prevented from paying too much for a property. Why would that benefit a seller? Well, if their realtor has told them that the property is worth X and it's really worth Y because the survey came back and the price difference or the amount of adjustment is greater than 10%, well, they may want to reconsider what the sales price should be. Okay, so it's not necessarily a bad thing for the seller if this is checked as well. When you're talking about a property this large, that means the price is high and the stakes are high. So this is an important paragraph to be mindful of. Okay. On paragraph 6E, exception documents. Prior to the execution of the contract, seller has provided buyer with copies of the exception documents listed below or on the attached exhibit. Matters reflected in the exception documents listed below or on the attached exhibit will be permitted exceptions in the title policy and will not be a basis for objection to title. Okay, so these, I mean, the more complex a piece of property is, such as the farm and ranch arena, the more risk there is on the title side. If we're talking about hundreds of acres, sometimes in these instances, who knows what that current seller has agreed to with regards to perhaps a local group of hunters, perhaps that he or she's allowed to hunt on the property, any kind of leases that were provided, any kind of exception to title has to be provided in this paragraph, okay? Which is a good segue to paragraph 6F, as in Frank, which are surface leases. Okay, so this section right here. Okay, so prior to the execution of the contract, seller has provided buyer with copies of written leases and given notice of oral leases listed below or on the attached exhibit. The following leases will be permitted exceptions in the title policy and will not be a basis for objection to title. So this obviously has title implications, but it's also relevant to the transaction that the buyer knows if there are any leases that the current seller has provided. And again, written or oral, which can get into a tricky situation. What has the current seller just verbally told the next door neighbor they could do on their property? So when would that come into play? That could mean, in my prior example, let the next door neighbor hunt. Maybe the current seller has these beautiful pecan trees that produce world-class Texas pecans every year, and he has kind of had a friendly agreement with the neighbors that they can come over and take all they want, and maybe your buyer doesn't want to do that. Is there water that the next door neighbor needs, and they have either done a verbal or a written lease that allows that neighbor to do that. Another example might be the seller has a pond that he or she has verbally allowed the next door neighbor to fish in. And maybe you don't want that. Maybe you have grandkids that are going to come over and use that pond, and rightly so, it's your property, and you don't want that neighbor to do that any longer. Well, the only way to validate that is to disclose, right? So figure out from the seller whether or not that has happened. Okay, so the thing you have to remember is that there are lots of different things that a large parcel of land can be used for, and it's really a matter of you as the agent asking a lot more questions and different questions as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The good news is the 1-to-4, or I'm sorry, the farm and ranch contract really allows for all those considerations. All right, so let's talk about considerations for a farm and ranch sale. Okay, survey costs and the process. So you might remember from real estate school, if you're listing a home in XYZ subdivision, you are familiar with the lot and block system. So that means, as an example, a developer came in and bought 100 acres worth of land and chopped them up into quarter-acre lots, and all those lots and blocks were assigned a number and, in some cases, a letter. Well, you may remember from real estate school that there's another way to do a survey, and that's meets and bounds. And for lack of a better description, in these rural areas, it could be as simple as let the starting point be this 50-ton boulder at latitude, longitude, and go due east by 600 feet, and that's the other landmark, and from there you do a survey. And so that process is not a quick one, and it's not an inexpensive one. Cost for a survey for a large farm and ranch property could be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So who has the survey and how accurate it is very, very important. Okay, I've seen surveys cost $5,000 just because of the large amount of land that is involved, not to mention the complexity of how you do it. So a survey, who has it, how accurate it is a big deal. Mineral rights. Okay, so the larger the piece of land, the more the mineral rights come into play, the more of them there are. So please be mindful that mineral rights, if there are any existing for the current seller, that we get complete clarity on whether or not those convey. Going back to 2007, 8, and 9, a lot of these mineral rights were leased to other large companies. So for a subdivision, it's not as big of a deal. But for large parcels of land, it's about 50-50 that the seller owns it or doesn't own it. Water wells. Make sure that you know, obviously, what the source of water is for this piece of property, but more importantly, who's entitled to it. Is it just used by this current seller, or is it used by multiple people, meaning your neighbors, and that is a possibility. Okay, rollback taxes and future use of properties. This is probably the single greatest concern when conveying a piece of farm and ranch property. So I'll take the opportunity now to tell you that if you represent a buyer or a seller, but especially a buyer of a farm and ranch property, it is almost impossible to see this through risk-free without your buyer getting a lawyer. It is no more important than it is in this transaction. A lawyer and a CPA. And this point of rollback taxes is why. So if a person buys a piece of farm and ranch property that is currently being used as such, meaning that there are animals and there's crops being used, there have been tax breaks given to that property and that property owner. It could range anything from just actual taxes to agricultural exemptions called an ag exemption, and there are requirements to get these taxes. Well, if the buyer buys this and ceases using it as it is being used today, then there are tax implications. Some enforceable, some not, but there are tax implications, and at a very, very macro level, those tax breaks could go away for whatever the future use is, but then the current buyer might be on the hook for all the exemptions that were given to the prior owner, going as far back as however the tax entity feels is appropriate. So this is the single greatest component of this process that you need to make sure you get right. Okay? So do not allow your buyer to cut corners with regards to not getting a CPA involved and not getting a lawyer involved. So there's three things now so far that we've talked about that could be huge expenses. The expense of a survey if one doesn't exist, the expense of a CPA, and the expense of a lawyer. Three things of which you need to give your buyer a clear heads up to expect to pay for those three things. And if it comes to pass that they don't have to pay for one of them, then that's a bonus. But I would expect to have to pay for all of those things. The next is annexation. So what do I mean by that? Well, in these rural areas, they are most likely not part of a township. And it could be sometime in the future that the town has a desire to annex pieces of where they are right now. So in a lot of these rural areas in Texas, it's governed by a county and not the actual town. Now, several years ago, Texas legislation was as such that made this much, much more difficult. So, and what I mean by that is that if a town borders, I don't know, 25 nearby acres that's currently under a county jurisdiction, they want to make it the town of whatever, then they have to get 100% buy-in from the residents that currently live there. So there has to be clear acceptance that it's okay for those current residents to allow the town to annex them. Now, that may, just give you a little civics lesson, that may have benefits to those folks in the way of fire and police protection. You know, maybe they're not getting that right now, and to be part of the town, they would. And there are some other town services that would benefit them from being annexed. But it's important for you to do your due diligence to see if that is going to happen. And the best resource to do that is the local town office. They're going to have records of everything that the town council talks about and has passed. Okay, written and oral leases. So we've talked about that prior. The bigger the plot of land, the more likely that it is that that seller has created a revenue stream by leasing some of it to somebody or multiple people for multiple reasons. Okay, so make sure that you know what those are. Ag exemptions. Okay, we've talked about a little bit about that earlier. There is an agricultural exemption to taxes. If you have a certain amount of livestock and you're doing certain things that are agriculturally beneficial to the land, make sure that you research the county tax records to see what those might be. Is it in a municipal utility district or a MUD? Is it being heated by propane gas? And is the sewer system an on-site sewer system, which means a septic tank? Okay, chances are it's yes to all these, but there are certain addendums, notices, and contracts that have to be included to make sure the buyer knows what that means. And so, as an example, if they are in a MUD, that means an extra cost per month to get your utilities. If they are, if they have a septic system, there are documents that have to serve as proof that that system has been serviced. Is it on its last leg or is it brand new? Propane usage, same thing. Okay. And then if you're listing it, you need to consider signage. Okay. It is not going to be enough to put it just in the MLS and put this, 18 by 24 sign at the curb. If you've driven past any of these farm and ranch properties, you are most likely seen these huge wall-sized, almost mini billboards that sit on the property. And in many cases, there are multiple signs like that. And so why is that? Obviously, the bigger the lot, the greater visibility you want. So as a listing agent, be prepared to spend, upwards of perhaps $1,000 just on signage. Okay, next are easements. Okay, the bigger the lot, the more likely there are going to be easements on the property. This will reveal itself in the survey, but sometimes they are large easements or large setbacks, which means that you can't build something within a certain amount of feet or yards of something, a structure or some kind of landmark. This is going to be a big deal because if the new buyer wants to come in and construct 50 more horse stalls as an example, but there's an easement that prevents them from doing that or a setback, then that may be a deal breaker for the purchase. Okay, and we've mentioned this before, tax implications for both buyer and seller. Consult a CPA. Okay, can't say this enough. And then if you want to really, add some initials at the end of your name with regards to how expert you are in farm and ranch, there is an accredited land consultant designation. Just go ahead and search that, and a local title company or Champions or local real estate school will have this designation. Your local board may also provide, in fact I know they do, free courses that don't necessarily give you a designation, but they give you a lot of knowledge about this subject, and they are always taught by an experienced person. Okay, so it's not just going to be theory, so you're going to get lots of stories and anecdotes about what they've experienced and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if you're not ready to get the designation or you don't want to spend any money, please go look up your local board. All of them have educational opportunities, and look for farm and ranch. Okay, so prospecting and marketing. So let's get down to the sales aspect of this. So if you are representing, really either a buyer or seller, how do you find these properties? How do you market them? Equestrian centers and supply stores, feed supply stores. You have to kind of go where the customers are, right? Direct mail. A lot of these rural areas, this business is done by word of mouth. And so to direct mail a flyer about this listing you may have, that's gonna go a long way. Okay, they're gonna communicate that their neighbor's farm and ranch is for sale. Maybe they want to buy it. Okay, that's very common. Engage in relationships and the community. Again, this tends to be a very tight-knit community within the farm and ranch source of business. So get in there and engage in those relationships. Know your numbers. Cost per acre, your competition, income potential. Remember that this yes might be someone's dream to own a horse ranch, and they may just want to do that, but you might have someone come forward that wants to see how much income this can produce. And so know your numbers there. All right. Marketing and representing your seller well. So like anything else, you need to prove that you're out there working. And this is the power of distribution is not as effective in this area as it is for someone looking for a home to live in. They want good schools and the normal things. This requires a lot more work, and so the easiest way and the most effective way is to look at other agents that are doing this and call them. That's what it's going to take. It's not going to be enough to just put it in the MLS, put a sign in the yard, and hope that it sells. You're going to need to network with other agents that have clients that want this kind of property. Okay? And then lastly, don't cut corners on photography. Use a drone if possible. These are large properties, higher end properties. Again, $500,000 and up. You need to be prepared to spend the money on good, effective photography. Things that showcase the entire property and really market it well. And the most effective way to do that is a drone set to music. Obviously, there are companies that do this for a living. Don't be afraid to use them. Okay? All right. So that kind of concludes this recorded version of our training for this time, Farm and Ranch. So if you have any questions about the content, or if you want to craft a plan on how to kind of immerse yourself in this area, it is a cool little niche to get into. And again, your competition is not that great. So all you need to do is get out there and gather some education and be an expert and immerse yourself in where these customers are. So don't be afraid to reach out to me, to your local board, get some education, get accredited, and make this part of your portfolio. Hope you enjoyed this training, and we'll see you next time.